Welcome to Rural Reboot. I'm your host, Sage Goodwin, and today I'm joined by Justin Culver. How are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you doing, Sage?
Doing wonderful. It is a beautiful day and talking to a wonderful individual. So, first off, who is Justin Culver?
That's a good question. I'm still figuring that out. I would describe myself as a serial entrepreneur, a life learner, and someone who seeks bigger meanings in even the small things, and someone who is on a spiritual journey that doesn't end and started in with this life. So that's the big picture.
Could you talk a little bit about your history? How did you get started with entrepreneurship?
It really started as a kid, and I think that this is a good topic to really bring in the worldview. And when you think of things and life as a life learner, I think some of these sayings are a little cliche, but they came about because there is some deeper meaning. And if you look at life as not something just to gain, some assets or to be successful and then you die, but rather that it's a continuation, then I think you look at things a little differently. You might look at them as an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to mature, and then it doesn't really stop. There isn't a start and an end.
Mm-hmm.
So as a child, uh, I was an entrepreneur in the sense that I, you know, wanted to earn money to buy things that my parents wouldn't readily buy for me. And so it's really a conversation I think that started as a child in gaining assets. And this is an important thing for all individuals to have some kind of a freedom to be able to to have a job and to be able to gain assets, and I'll get more into that. But it really started in my childhood in mowing lawns, in trading skateboards and motorcycles, and eventually automobiles, cars, and houses and things like that.
That's fascinating. I really like how you put it. There is no beginning and there is no end. I like you am one of those people that I love to learn, and I don't think there should ever be an end to learning. It is such a huge asset. And here locally, we're working on a program called Flex Start, which is kind of teaching those soft skills. And a big part of those soft skills is the motivation around learning or developing your skills past what they were originally, and broadening those. What was kind of your path as you started saying, "Oh, hey, I really like this thing. My parents won't buy it for me, but I can see a pathway forward to where I can acquire it myself." What were some of the things that you started with?
Yeah, so I think it really all starts with a vision. It starts with seeing yourself either in a different position from a freedom perspective, or quite simply with a bicycle or a motorcycle that your parents say you can have that, but we're not going to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
We'll approve of you pursuing that, but that's not something we're just going to give you. And so that vision of seeing your life on a motorcycle as a 10-year-old is quite the empowering type of vision. And so it could start as simple as some simple wants and desires, whether it be baseball cards, firecrackers, video games, things like that. But then it
Mm-hmm.
progresses into larger, kind of more mature type of items that then can provide again that either that freedom or the ability to not kind of live from lawn mowing job to lawn mowing job, but rather have some flexibility in the summer and
Mm-hmm.
and be able to purchase the things you want and kind of start to see that vision come to fruition.
Would you say you had a similar vision as you started your discovery into entrepreneurship than you do now, or has it grown and shifted as you move forward?
Yeah, that's a great point. It has grown and shifted. Um, as we have different experiences in life, different things become a higher priority. So, obtaining goods like material possessions is still a part of the equation. I would say it's a lot less of a priority. Um, as an example, experiences now, and we're talking about being a life learner and that there's not really a beginning and end, those experiences become maybe even more valuable for maturity and growth and
Mm-hmm.
learning than owning something, which can often, in fact, almost be on the opposite side of the equation, where it can lose value, it can tie you down, you can become almost a slave to those things. So, though they are a part of the equation, it's I think you're bringing up a good point that they have their place in that equation, but they're not the the priority.
Mm-hmm. So as you're going through this discovery period, I would like to kind of touch base on one of the stops that you made on this path, which was the World Food Exchange. What were you involved with World Food Exchange?
Yeah. So there are two different entities there. One is the Global Food Exchange, and then the World Food Bank that specifically is focused on Africa and really solving world hunger. I
Mm-hmm.
had the opportunity to work with Richard Lackey, the founder of the World Food Bank, um, over the last 6 years on some different software projects. And I won't go into those, but Richard and I have been on similar paths in just different timing. He's been a very successful entrepreneur, and at some point in his life, he said, "I want to leave a legacy. I want to change the world." And those people who think they can are the ones that actually do. So
Mm-hmm.
Richard basically stopped pursuing most of his businesses and assets that he was obtaining and said, I want to help with this issue of world hunger. And so the Global Food Exchange portion of that is to respond to disasters across the globe in a much faster and efficient way to provide food and shelter and medicine and things like that to people that are in a disaster. Katrina was one of those disasters that happened that brought a lot of urgency to that type of service. So, from that, then providing those types of food storage and accessibility really um, shed some light on the types of food or the availability of that food, and so it led the World Food Bank into Africa to help solve not only the supply and demand for these type of emergency response mechanisms, but also we were discovering that many countries in Africa are not food secure. And what food secure really just means is they can't provide enough food for the population they have in their country. The
Mm.
United States is very good at this, very, very efficient, and other parts of the world are not. So that's really what kind of led us into to Africa and working with a lot of the local governments and businesses there to help provide food not only to the global food exchange and that emergency response, but also to their own countries and other parts of the world.
That's incredibly impactful work. Uh, you're kind of talking through this made me think about where do you see the pairing of a I don't necessarily want to use this word, but I will use this word, the greater good, and paired with entrepreneurship or a passion for helping individuals versus just a purely personal look at things. Where do you see that pairing in the efforts that one can make on the broader world and then one can make through entrepreneurship?
Yeah, you're asking some great questions. I look at entrepreneurship as a liberal way of thinking, and I don't want to confuse the political term or what people might think of
Mm-hmm.
being liberal with the way of thinking as an entrepreneur. Um, Entrepreneurship is a very liberal way of thinking. What I mean by that is kind of challenging the status quo, maybe not doing things or thinking about things in the same paradigm as
Mm-hmm.
you once have or that a culture does. So to me, it's stepping outside of a culture and having a different paradigm altogether. But entrepreneurship is is looking at these types of problems and seeing how they can be solved. And often it includes a benefit to yourself.
Mm.
Entrepreneurship can also include benefit to others. So so it doesn't just have to be from a personal gain perspective. And I think that's what part of a maturity path or just learning will bring over the different experiences is you can trade a skateboard for a motorcycle, or you can sell a home and buy a business or some vehicles or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that can be very personal, and you can gain satisfaction in that. But as you have different experiences, especially again outside of your own culture and outside of the way you view and think about yourself, then you can start to think about others and other countries, other cultures, and other people. And that's where I think there's a transition that can and often happens with entrepreneurs, that they become a little more focused on the greater good.
Hmm.
And frankly, it's just more satisfying. It comes back to some really simple, cliches that I think of, that it's always better to give than to receive. Those types of things you hear, and it means very little to you unless you've experienced
Mm-hmm.
that, and then it can become a deeper kind of a meaning. So so when you can provide something to a group of people, or you're a part of a bigger project, it is honestly just a lot more satisfying, and the learning experiences are are more rich than again trading the skateboard for the motorcycle.
Mm-hmm. What was your discovery period for finding that mission for you? What was that like? Was it a light bulb moment, or was it like, okay, this is something I've always felt? What was that process for you?
I think it came through many different experiences, so it will be hard to pinpoint, but I can give you some examples.
Yeah.
I can give you a couple that might help kind of frame it. One of them would be, when you're talking about goals in a business, I early on had a goal to give away $1 million, and I thought that would be something that would be impactful. I could choose different organizations or groups and be able to give $1 million away. Upon wanting to sell my businesses, I had more money than I had ever had, and I was able to give more than I'd ever been able to give. And I think that, as an example, was a moment of when you finally get there to a degree, then you sit back, and it becomes a reality of was this exactly what I thought it was? And frankly speaking, it was very stressful to give the amount of money that I did.
Mm.
Upon again wanting to sell my businesses, it wasn't nearly as much fun as I thought. It was stressful. There was a lot of pressure. There was time frames involved, due to taxes and these different constraints. And so I think that honestly was one of them. Another one would be, part of that is if you say, what would you do if I gave you $100 million right now, and that was a reality. It's in your bank. Like, how does
Mm-hmm.
that change your life today? And whether it really truly happens, or whether you imagine it, I think it's very helpful exercise to think about what you would do with that, and how your life would change. And many people start to go down the list of, well, I would buy this, and then I would give this to my parents, and but when you think it through on a little deeper level, or if you've done that enough times, that's great, and that can be a part of it. But I think really what you start to tap into is why was I created? What is my
Mm.
purpose? How can I impact someone other than my parents? Which is, it's a great start, but
Yeah.
but then you start to think a little deeper, and so that's probably maybe the easiest kind of a concrete example of maybe when when the light bulb, came on, is
Mm-hmm.
first of all, just to clarify, to imagine that, and then at some level or another, experiencing that, then, really starts to have you question what you would do, and again, your purpose and your impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your cup was full and it was still filling, and where are you gonna go next? Have that
Right.
kind of thought process. And I think there's a lot of merit to having that internal kind of thinking of like what do I really want now? What are the steps that I can get to, or that I can do to get to that point? And I think for a lot of people, entrepreneurship is a good step for that. So I used to work at a local library, and I love the library system. I love it, but it was very regimented, and it was a very different shift for me from previously going around selling eggs that our chickens had laid, or making bracelets, and then going around different businesses pitching those and saying, "Hey, would you like to carry our bracelet in your business?" That kind of thing. So going from that to a very regimented government entity was a huge shift for me, and I've been rediscovering my passion for entrepreneurship and this passion for trying different things and that learning. Do you have any recommendations for people who may be in that 9 to 5 job that they may not be super happy with? They have a passion to start I don't know, a hot sauce business or something along those lines, but do you have any recommendations for people that are just on the edge, that they're starting to do these things, and they may have that little voice in their head saying, "Oh, you might not make it"?
Yeah. Yeah, you framed the question well, because I think the fear comes into play almost every time. And so my advice or suggestion would be to really keep an open mind, to look for opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
and to really um, have some faith. And what I mean by that is the way you frame it, even with, the fear that creeps in that says, "What if I don't make it?" There is a good fear and there's a bad fear.
Mm-hmm.
The good fear is talking about driving 150 miles an hour down the road and thinking, what if I get a flat tire, or what if I get pulled over? You know, People don't really understand fear. We don't talk about it and break it down a lot. So we won't do that here. But the but the basic of it is that there is a healthy fear of just, wisdom, you might call it. It's not
Mm-hmm.
wise to drive 150, down the road, unless it's the right situation. But the other fear that comes in is the worry, the anxiety, the what ifs. And though those can be a little dangerous to, you don't necessarily want to quit your job and just start, your business for the first time, without any preparation or having someone
Mm-hmm.
that can help you through it, or, things like that. But at the same time, I would say that those fears often are what drive most people. And we live in that kind of a culture even right now. And so it's very acceptable to have the fear and to say, well, but look at this situation or that. And that's almost looked at as wisdom. But I think there's a big difference between the two. And so I would say again that the opportunities need to be looked at through a lens of not only maybe some wisdom. I won't call it fear, I'll call it wisdom. But also, what if what if it works out? What if you have
Mm-hmm.
$100 million from this? Let's go down that path.
Yeah.
Let's think it through, and really consider those opportunities. And the more you live in that space, I believe that is what enables you to then carry that out. If you live in a place that it's always the what if it goes bad kind of a place, then you aren't going to step into it. I don't believe that we just create, what we believe. I don't go as far as to create that, but there is a lot of truth in that type of thought process. But I believe that if you look at those opportunities, and you look at them without the fear lens, that is the place to
Mm-hmm.
start.
Yeah, I really like that. What if it does go well?
Right.
And I think we never get to that point where like, oh, there's a positive option to this as well.
right. And then starting small and not and allowing your vision to evolve
Mm-hmm.
in very small increments. And again, I think a lot of people in their mind, they've started and failed the business so many times that it's not gonna. We're never gonna get to 100 million because of this. And it's like, well, we don't have to. It's you don't have to get to the 100 million right away. You just start small, and if you really love it,
Yeah.
it's a passion, then it'll grow. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
I think that's such a fantastic point too. I mean, if where I was sitting 2 years ago, thinking about where I was going to be today, I would not have. I may have gotten a part of it correct, but about 85% to 90% of what I do now, I had no idea that I would be doing when I began this. And I think it ultimately it comes from a place of yes. If you have that initial mindset of let's entertain the opportunity to say yes to this possibility. And I think that's such a huge part of it too, is like you may have an idea. And I think during COVID-19 we found so many businesses, they had an idea of what the future was going to be. The future did not end up being that way, and you have to pivot.
yeah. And often we've gotten into projects and businesses where we said if we would have known how difficult this actually was, we would have never started it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the actual beauty of the small steps and starting it because it was successful. Now, if we didn't know how difficult it was, and we didn't know on the flip side how successful it could have been, and like you said, there could be a pivot. And so it's it's just great to have the big vision, but to then start, in those small steps. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good start.
So you've been dropping these teases for people about some of your past endeavors. Could you go a little bit more detail in some of the things that you've done in the past, and then we'll talk about what you're doing currently.
Yeah. So in the past, I went to school for engineering, and I had a passion for how things worked and be able to explain, down to the detail and the science and technology of how things actually operate. That's the left side of the brain that
Mm-hmm.
I can enjoy, um, and that led me into really a forensic job right out of college. And I was fortunate enough to have the entrepreneurial background where when I saw that corporate structure, frankly, I was very turned off and saw my path as being a little stifled. And so I immediately started a side business. And and that went into an IT managed service company over the course of many years, and then also a software development company. And along the way, we had opportunities to not only work on our own business, but we had hundreds of clients over the course of those years that we helped solve their problems. So it was a kind of an entrepreneur's dream. You have your own business, but then you have many others that you're solving
Mm-hmm.
those very specific problems. And so it didn't ever get boring, frankly. And I'm more motivated by the type of work and the satisfaction that comes in solving the problem and seeing the impact of the solution rather than just the financial gain, though that was a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a lot of my history was in the software development consulting company and the IT managed services. And then because of the startup scene here locally and also in San Francisco and some other communities, I was able to be a part of not only the startups that I started myself and
Mm-hmm.
the products, but also some of those other startups. And so that took me to different places in the world and got me exposure to all kinds of different people and products. And one of those just happened to be kind of the early stages of Bitcoin. And and like most people, when I first heard of it, it took me a couple years, honestly, to get over kind of the stigma around it and
You're doing
the
what now?
exactly. So I met some of the OGs in that space in the city, and specifically with the company Circle. and they said you need to check this out. And so, again, over the course of a few years, I eventually did, and that was definitely a different paradigm and a light bulb moment that I didn't. I mean, uh, it was a very pivotal kind of like a revelation, you could call it. Some businesses and some things kind of happen over time, though
Mm.
it did take a couple years for me to embrace it. When I did, the light bulb, it came on, and when it did, it was like I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop reading about it. And I thought this is going to change everything, so I really dove into it because it truly was one of those paradigms that you see the world through a whole different lens, when you really grasp the foundational change that it will cause and is causing. So
Hmm.
that's a brief, background of some of the business, and then yeah, and really kind of my passion now for uh, you know the current industry, and the new financial system, and even taking it to the World Food Bank and providing a token for commodities, and really helping democratize that wealth creation, not only in Africa as an example through agriculture, but also other communities. So that's a pretty quick timeline
Hmm.
of some of that.
Where do you see the current state of cryptocurrency and just the idea of a blockchain? Where do you see it currently, and where do you expect it to go in the next 5 years?
Well, the vision that comes to mind is that we're standing on a beach and we're looking toward the land, and there's a tidal wave, a massive tsunami behind us of a new financial system. And most people are unaware that this wave is going to hit the shore. And it's not necessarily a dangerous wave where we're all going to drown, but it's just that vision I get of of just this massive wave. It kind of reminds me of when the internet started coming online, and
Hmm.
the media and most people are just saying, this is a bubble, or this is silly. When this all goes away, we'll get back to normal life, and it's now ubiquitous, and we can't even describe any of our life without
Hmm.
the internet, in the dot coms in some way. Uh, and then I also think of that same kind of wave as a bell curve, because it looks a little bit like a wave. And I think we're on that still that early adopter phase. If you're in the industry, you think the ship has sailed and we're deep into it, but the general population has not adopted the idea and the concepts, and hasn't transacted or worked in the industry. So therefore, on that bell curve of adoption, I think again we're on the early adopter phase, where we're a quarter of the way into that overall bell curve.
Mm. What are some of the hangups that you see with it currently? Is it just exposure, or there's some technical limitations to it at this point?
I think it's a way of thinking. It's a culture. It's a paradigm, and it's that people don't really like change. You can look at many changes throughout history and see the same kind of patterns. That would be around electricity. You and I don't know life without electricity. And
Hmm.
so when I think about the invention of it, and maybe read some really basic concepts around electricity, I think, well, someone invented this, and then this is awesome, obviously.
Yeah.
But that's not what happened. The culture rejected it. It was looked at as highly dangerous, and why would you put wires in your home for it to burn down? And this is only, a toy for the super wealthy. And I mean, it was, as a culture, it was looked at like that. And you can look at that example with automobiles. You can also look at the internet, even the credit card. If we talk about
Mm.
currencies as an example, money moving to paper, have it being a banknote backed by the government and backed by gold, but backed in a sense that this is a note, this is a piece of paper, all
Yeah.
the way to a credit card where, you know, the Diners Club was not looked at as this great invention, and we can't all wait to have credit cards. But look where how we transact today. So so I kind of compare it to that, and I don't think the technology has really any limitations at this point, to be honest. That might be a naive statement, if I look back in 20 years, but I've been around technology for some time, and wow, I'm amazed at what is capable today, and how
Blockchain, we're
it's
using sphere
changing
chain
things.
now.
That's right. Like, oh, you were part of that blockchain group. Wow, you guys were small thinkers.
hmm I think that's one of the coolest things too with technology is it's so immersive in all aspects of our daily lives that I mean we're getting to the point where microwaves now have a voice assistant with them and they can be controlled as such, and I don't think many people except the most crazy science fiction novels really predicted that. And just to imagine the types of technology that we could have in the future is we won't even scratch the surface of that for a number of years, but we are creating more information in a matter of seconds than we have in the previous history of the world combined. And I think that's the coolest part of it. Kind of
Absolutely.
we've been talking about this large scale for a little bit. Let's kind of zone in a little bit and talk a bit about how you got involved with this area and what we're doing here in Fremont County.
I think it's been most of the exposure to like minds. Um, Brad and Phil specifically were able to articulate things that I was already thinking, as far as what this technology does and the impact it can have,
Mm-hmm.
and then applying it to a culture and a community. And you know, Brad and Phil both are successful entrepreneurs that have been through a lot of what we've talked about, the experiences, the learning, the epiphanies, the paradigms. And I really appreciate and really connect with people who then can look at the world in a phase in their life where they can say, how can we help? How can we be a
Mm-hmm.
part of something that's bigger than just myself and what I own in my sphere, but actually impacting a community. And so I got exposure to Fremont County through those men, and it's with a vehicle, around real estate maybe, or democratizing wealth creation, and really just again kind of going back to looking at opportunities, and not only for ourselves but looking at opportunities for a whole community. And I just think that it's such a great thing to be involved with. It's there's so much satisfaction and so much fun. Um, so that's how I got the exposure, and there's a lot of details in that we can go into if you'd like, but that's how I got exposed.
When so you're a Colorado native, which not a whole lot of people can say. I can't personally say that. But what are some of the shifts that you've seen around Colorado in your time with it, especially in the startup community, which Startup Week was a huge part of Denver and Boulder and originated here and has spread around the country. But what was that like for you growing up in Colorado and then kind of broadening that exposure?
Yeah, so I grew up in the rural community of Colorado in a small town, and a conglomerate of small towns, really. In the Telluride, Norwood, Nucla, Ridgeway, Uray, Natarita. There are a whole lot of communities in the southern part of Colorado. So I grew
Mm-hmm.
up with a perspective outside of the city, first of all, and that's again what gave me the exposure to the entrepreneurial way of thinking. It was a way of life, right? So moving into the city, then I got to see Denver change dramatically over the last, even 20, 25 years. And what I notice in that is there, you know, many opportunities, first of all, which is great. And, all ships rise with the rising tide. And so that's a kind of an interesting thing to watch and see in a state like Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And you also see a part of society and culture being kind of forced out a bit and pushed aside. And I don't know how a way to articulate that in a great way, but it's not like someone's being oppressed. It's just that the opportunities start to become focused on, hey, I started a business, I was successful, I'm able to buy some of the real estate. The real estate prices are going up. This is great for me. High five.
Hmm.
What are you up to? But it's kind of like where I think Phil Lund is a good example of this. When you look at a community and you look at how you develop a community, it's not just about the entrepreneur getting rich. Sure, there are those opportunities, but it's also looking at a bigger picture. And so we can look at a community, but we can also look at even the state as a whole.
Hmm.
So I've seen a lot of that transpire in the state, and also again I appreciate being able to have some like minds of Phil as an example to understand a different point of view.
Yeah, and I think too, as we've seen through the pandemic, that there is a rise in the idea that, oh, hey, I can work for this tech company, but I don't necessarily have to be in a tech sector,
Hmm.
but I can go and enjoy a life in the mountains. I can and enjoy a life where I grew up or somewhere entirely different. And I think these rural areas, we're definitely seeing it here in Fremont County, but we're seeing a rise in people coming in, and the property values have gone way up. But that's mostly because of a lack of housing than it is a specific one thing. It's we don't have a lot of housing, so when people come to the area, it is taking away some of the inventory that we have, and that is, I think, one of the biggest issues that a lot of these rural towns face is housing. If you look at, I mean, even Boulder has put a cap on how many new developments are getting built in the area, and they're landlocked as well. And then you're expanding to these other areas, and you're facing an issue. Even if you have the funds to buy a house, you may not be able to find one. And I think that's probably one of the biggest issues that a lot of these, especially in Colorado, these mountain towns are facing, because we have fantastic outdoor sports, the air, all of these wonderful things about the area, and I think we're slowly but surely we're coming to realize them ourselves. Like, hey, we live in a pretty cool spot.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk about your entrepreneurial journey, some of the experiences that you've had, and the area that we're in. Greatly enjoyed this discussion today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. This has been fun.
And I will put some links down below for some of the stuff that you're working on if people listening would like to check further. And I will also link the talk that you did at our Entrepreneurial Accelerator program that we did in September and October. So if people would like to check that out, it will be in the description of this podcast episode.